It's how do you stack things and make it as easy as possible to flow through so it's health by design. You can't eat this anymore. They're automatically gonna ask, well, what can I eat? However you want to feel about it, like we have to team up with the government. Like they're throwing money away. And unless we get some portion of that to like do real things in the community, I don't know how we're ever gonna fix this.
Well, you're a Nike Master Trainer.
Yeah.
What does that imply?
I mean, basically, it's so Nike has a training program. So they basically have trainers under their umbrella that they think kind of uphold the standards of the brand. And then we work with them for project development and
Mm.
program development. So basically, within the app, I have a couple training programs on there that are about 6 to 8 weeks long, depending.
So
And it's just free and it's just available for people to partake. So I've been with Nike for about 5 6 years and work with them in various capacities. It's pretty cool, but my thing has always been like, how do you open source or tap into these bigger companies that I think should be doing more in the health community? So it's definitely helped, push me to the forefront in various areas, but always looking to do more.
yeah, it's a platform. You
Yeah.
use it for what it's worth, and then, but you've been, I think, really successful in terms of creating your own brand and spreading the word about the things that you're passionate about as well. Like you've developed Ocho System, which I want to learn about.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah. So basically, my thing was, and I think this is what I've learned from being close to people within fashion. It's you got to create your own IP, and as you alluded to, it's
Mm.
then use things for what they were worth. Of course, build relationships, but the Ocho system was kind of a philosophy I formed while I was in college. When I went to UPenn playing football, dealt with some injuries, and I was, to be honest, like I was like mentally and physically fucked up. So I was trying to understand what was going on with my body, but then I think at a young age, I understood the symbiosis between body and mind, especially as it comes to pain. And my football coaches just weren't that good, like in terms of strength and conditioning coaches. So basically, in college, I created something called the Ocho System. It's basically the thought process. If I could heal my physical self, that then helps me mentally and emotionally. Which then, after school, kind of delved into this concept of one could help others and others could help one, and just really looking at things through like a feedback loop of gratitude. Because I was so I my thing is like we often only experience growth through trauma, but there's so many lessons in history, as I'm sure you know, or what you've dealt with, especially as it pertains to your mom, that if you learn from other people's lessons, then hopefully you can help others not go through that. So that's typically how I've like always just lived my life. And I just think that there's an ability to get freedom through taking control of your physical health and then building off that. So it also is like 8 core areas that I think people should take integrative wellness strategies into, right? So it's not just physical, but also like mental, emotional, spiritual, occupational, societal, and then of course like intellectual and other capacities, environment. So then the thing becomes, can you create kind of an ecosystem that allows you to flourish, right? But of course, start with yourself and then understand how that kind of spreads out. So my whole thing is just like kind of being an expert generalist, understanding different traits, aspects as it pertains to health of self, but then that greater self kind of with a capital S. How can we push that out a little bit into our communities and hopefully make some structural changes that make it easier for people to flourish?
I love that. So wait, what did you play in college?
I play football.
You play football.
Yeah, kick my ass.
Nice. I was never an athlete, so I definitely have a lot of respect for people who are, especially professionals like you. But how are you? So how are you like? I don't know. How are you treating your body? What were you feeding your body prior to the revelation that you had, and then like what was that turning point for you like?
So I think any I think any athlete is a little bit hard headed, especially at 18, 19, 20. I actually grew up, my dad is an integrative doctor. So he's an MD, but he's like uh also does kind of holistic and alternative. So you could call him like a CAM practitioner, I guess is the easiest way to describe him, but an MD. So growing up, I was super exposed to, because the office is connected to my house. Like I was super exposed to more so holistic way of living, let's say, right? Composting in the backyard. My mom's an immigrant from Trinidad. She's, juicing for us, cooking for us. Like it was a really whole food oriented lifestyle. So growing up, I was fine. And I was a premature kid, so I didn't really take until I was older just how impactful, because I was sick as a kid, how impactful that was, the way my parents raised me on possibly me doing better, right? But then when you go to college and you're kind of like whatever about your parents, you forget things. So mine was a situation in college where, and this is going to sound a little crazy, but we had a strength and conditioning coach that would tell kids that were freshmen who needed to gain weight that they had to drink a gallon of milk a day.
No
A
way.
gallon of milk a day.
Wow.
And, you know, if you're especially dependent upon your background, that's probably not going to fit you a bit. But I was just eating. I was just eating too much. I was stressed out from school. I wasn't really approaching it in a systematic way. I think when you're, especially at that young age, your body could just handle what it could handle, especially with that physical activity. And then I got hurt. And then with the physical activity lessening, kind of the difficulties of being an Ivy League institution. I wasn't doing what I was supposed to be doing. So I would say, however you want to look at it, I don't think I was really eating for recovery. I wasn't really eating for like life force. It was just wasn't good. So I think I had to take a step back and reevaluate it. And to be honest, it happened because my dad looked me dead in the face. And you know, he I think he's been in the game so long that he can kind of do like a body composition analysis with his eyes. And he was like, he just looked at me. He was like, "Yo," like he literally because he does his own blood testing on me, and he was like, "All right, take off your shirt." I think it was my sophomore year, and he was like, "Yo, you gotta get your shit together." And I was like, all right." And we sat down and we kind of formulated an eating plan, and you know, it helped me recover fully from my injuries and stuff, and it went from there.
Wow. Did you get on board with the whole like gallon of milk a day thing?
I mean, let's be honest, like, you know, as a black person, I cannot do that. Like lactose just doesn't really we can't do it. So I did not, but I have friends that did. And I look back on it because we had real athletic kids. Because the Ivy League is interesting, right? Because they're the athletes only go to a few schools, typically Harvard, sometimes Princeton, and really Penn because it's a city, right?
Mhm.
So we didn't really need to be doing that, to be honest, drinking a gallon of milk. So I didn't, but I had teammates go to the cafeteria every day with like literally a gallon bottle and
Oh my
fill it
god.
up. It's nauseating.
Yeah, yeah, I feel like you'd never want to like touch milk again after an experience like that.
Nah, I mean, I don't even like to touch heavy weights really. So it is what it is.
Damn. So then what was it? So then what was the new sort of diet or lifestyle that you adopted? Like how did you strike that balance? Because the demands I'm sure were still relentless.
Yeah, I mean, actually, when I look back on it, he didn't call it as such, but my dad basically had me doing kind of like time restricted feeding, so just
Hmm.
a base level circadian rhythm eating. He's very big on like letting the body recover when it should recover, and not just with food. So he didn't have me eating late, but even, you know, and he looked at this in some areas, but it's like when you're relaxing, get off your phone, you know, like simple things like that. So also the mental component was big, but yeah, it was basically time restricted feeding. It was cutting back on added sugars. It was making sure to hydrate super heavy. I have the handwritten original diet plan
From
somewhere
your
in my
dad?
garage. Yeah,
Your
still.
dad sounds like he's a badass.
Yeah, my
Like,
dad's a G. Like this is honestly about my dad. If he didn't have 7 kids, he would be, you know, he would be like whatever, a better Gregor or similar to Hyman or stuff like that. So it's fascinating, like all the stuff that's out now, like he was talking about, but it was honestly a lot of the same eating strategies you talk about. It was staying away from it was eating for health and then eating for performance is the easiest way to describe it. So the base rules were super simple, staying away from ultra processed foods, chewing your food was super important, making sure not to also eat too much added sugars. And then it was figuring out those added things for performance. So in college, I was still eating meat for some of the time. So it was making sure it was high quality, but the portions weren't too large. It was seeing whether the other foods that could be added in that could hopefully be performance enhancing. So say, I mean, he said at the time, you know, he was telling me to basically utilize chia seeds before that was a thing for a little bit of endurance. And simple things like that, like timing ginger. He bought me a juicer. I had it in my dorm room. I was understanding how to use that. So I think when people understand the difference of like eating for health and then eating for performance, like that's a huge unlock.
yeah, it's so interesting. So how's your dietary philosophy evolved over time? Like what's because nutrition is one aspect of the Ocho system.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So like what's that looking like for you these days?
I mean, for me personally, I like to say, look at it through an amoeba like structure, right? I think people get too caught up in absolutes, which is hard because nobody wants to actually sit down and then have a conversation about things. They're just like, oh, I'm right or I'm wrong. Me personally, I look at it like this. I'm a believer that at our particular age, it's easier for you to basically synthesize protein.
Hmm.
So I don't think we have to go heavily out of our way to get it, although it is a super important macronutrient. I don't, so with that thought process in mind, it's trying to bridge the gap between what's good for me versus also my understanding of what might be good for the environment, right? So instead of looking at this situation where people say meat is evil, this and that, I'm like, not that's not really the case. Meat could be super health promoting, but for me right now at this age, can I be a little bit more kind of deliberate with my eating strategies? So either focus, I'm basically a flexitarian. So depending on upon where I am and the quality of fish, I might eat that. But for the most part, I'm trying to just understand how to get more plant foods in my diet. And then eventually down the line, I think I'll probably reintroduce meat just as I age. But I'm really looking at it through kind of a mix of like reducing my water footprint because I think
Mm.
that's super important locally. And then just really trying to get more kind of, I like to say, minimally processed foods. So it's a plant based diet, but my thing was when I started a plant based diet, like nobody was talking about it in that way. So it's probably 7 or 8 years ago now,
Wow.
maybe a little more. But to me, it was always a thought process of 80% or more of your diet is from minimally plant processed foods. So that's how I look at it. And it's a little bit disheartening to see where the trend has gone in a plant based kind of movement. And people have been kind of myopic in the way that they approach it. And me personally, I'm not a big fan of all the, processed meat substitutes and things like that. So for me, I just try to get it from whole foods. I just look at, fish lower down on kind of the food chain, the smaller fish, or looking at the ones that are more locally sourced if I do choose to consume it. And then the other thing too is you need a lot of food, which I don't think people realize, especially at my size. But in general, like food isn't a reward. Like food is sustenance. So I think for me, especially if anybody who's an entrepreneur, creative, um, sometimes it's hard actually to eat enough. So that's something that I think I've been deliberate in figuring out.
Yeah. What are some of your favorite protein sources?
I mean, I do make a shake or two a day. I mean, that's super big for me. I think I've been better at learning how to prepare legumes or beans or things of that nature. So that one's really an easy one for me. I think the ability to be able to work in seeds, basically, like learning how to soak your chia seeds so they sit with you a little bit better. I think hemp seeds are a super unheralded source. Actually, there's been super minimally processed like chickpea pasta, which is super easy to work into the diet, especially if you still like to consume that.
I love a good chickpea pasta.
It's actually good.
Yeah,
It
it's so
just
good.
tastes like al dente,
Yeah,
right? It
I
doesn't.
love it.
It's so good.
I mean, I can't tell you the last time I had real pasta, so I definitely like if I'm having a craving, I'll go for chickpea pasta or they have like lentil pastas
Yeah.
now. Yeah, super tasty.
Yeah, so my thing is like I know we talk about protein a lot, but if people still eat meat, just eat it like eat it like a supplement. I mean, I think in the same way we approach phytonutrients or fruits and vegetables, like there's that same classification of nutrients that are in meat, and I don't think we should be wholly afraid of that. I just think we need to be more aware of what we're consuming.
Yeah, I agree. When it comes to uh, protein shakes, you mentioned you do protein shakes. What are you looking for in a plant based protein shake?
So that's a great question. There are kind of two ways that I've approached it as I've gotten older. I guess I'm like 31. I'm not that old, but I have noticed my body is changing, which is actually quite interesting. I think people mess up on the shakes because they're introduced first to super fruit heavy shakes when they're either not in shape or their body doesn't need that instead
Mm,
of like sustenance for fat-based shakes. So I've seen in the morning, typically, I typically focus on my digestion in the morning. So I push my first meal back a little bit just so I can move and hydrate. I think that's super important. And then I basically break down my classification of shakes into two things, kind of for sustenance or more like meal replacement or like energy replenishment post workout. So for me, it's like I either make a fat based shake, so it's just fat and protein focused, or I make like a replenishment kind of energy based shake, which is just like fruit and carbs. Now I know, excuse me, fruit and protein. I know a lot of people get into discussion about kind of macronutrient mixing. For me, it does work. I do notice a difference with that. So if I have like a fat based shake, it's like basically low net carbs, so some dark leafy greens, typically arugula, because that's one of the big ones for like nitric oxide production in the body. I'll put in some protein powder. I'll add in maybe some like coconut based yogurt. They've been got Coco June has actually gotten really good with that. They've probably made one of the cleaner yogurts that I've seen.
I feel like I've had that. It's really
It's
good.
good.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I throw that in there. If you like coffee, I might put some in there. Maybe a little adaptogens. some nut butter seeds. That one kind of gets me going. And then, post workout, those are typically super easy. You have your protein powder if you want, just put a banana, some blueberries, and then let that replenish. So I typically go post workout a 2 to 1 or 3 to 1 kind of carb to protein ratio. But I think people sleep on the fat based shakes. I think people sleep on fat. And for me, that's helped because I've actually felt better when I've gotten my body fat percentage up a little bit. I think I was a little bit too low.
Hmm.
And then understanding, the different roles that fat has in the body.
Yeah, so many. So wait, just going back to the protein, but do you do like pea protein or like a brown rice protein, or you mentioned hemp? Hemp is a great.
Yeah. So, I mean, the research on that one is weird, but typically I kind of gravitate towards a mix of brown rice, pea, and then there's like I think one company puts in Jerusalem artichoke. So that's epic. I like epic protein actually. That one's often set well with my stomach. A lot of the research is on soy, but I just don't really partake in it that heavy. But yeah, those are typically I typically do a brown rice and pea blend, and those typically sit pretty well for me.
That's awesome. Yeah, the thing about soy, like it actually is like a pretty high quality protein, but it's like a big question mark, I think. I mean, to be fair, the research on it, like, and its ability to, act as an estrogenic compound, I think it's pretty safe to
Yeah.
consume, especially like in moderate amounts. But it's still like one of those crops that's so heavily sprayed. And
That's the thing, I think, with a lot of these foods, it's how they're treated here in the US. So we do often take these questions about, all right, we know that it's actually consumed heavily in other cultures, and it also becomes how is that culture treating its food relatively. So I don't have anything against it per se. I think it's fine to consume tofu in moderation or sparingly, especially plant based as an extra protein source. And it's the same thing with, dairy. I think everything becomes inflammatory, but it's these structural questions. And I'm not going to say that I have all these answers now. And sometimes I think I look back and I realize like I'm still relatively young in my proliferation with this, and I just love to learn more. So if there are things that change my mind in the face of evidence, I'm more willing to change them. But right now, I'm just going to keep doing what's worked.
dude, it's the most powerful attitude you could have. I love that. I know one topic that is that you're super passionate about is increasing access to healthy food and just overall getting the message out of this sort of fitness lifestyle that we all, have embraced, but to communities that are underserved.
Yeah, I look at it like this, and we actually got into a spat once over something you had said on your Instagram, but I took time to actually think about it.
Oh no, what did I what did
I
I
can't remember what
say?
it was. I think it had something. There was something going on with you told a story about your grandma and Volkswagen.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
my
yeah, yeah,
yes,
yeah.
yeah,
Which
yeah.
was a powerful story. But anyway, that's an aside. We can talk about that later. But what I have thought about
Well, just
lately,
for listeners, my growing up, I was never my we were never allowed to have like German cars because my Jewish family, particularly on my mom's side, had always held a grudge against anything German made or also anything Japanese made, which is not something that I personally necessarily agree with. But that's just sort of like the
and then it
backstory.
got funny because then I said something, but then people in the comments turned it more so into like an economics discussion and brought up like Thomas Sowell and stuff or whatever. And that was it was it a whole aside. It's quite funny, but that's the internet. Um, Underserved community is interesting because I look at it like this. I think that there should be a social safety net for underserved communities. What makes me upset though is that for the cohort we're a part of, in my opinion, there's no excuse for them not to treat themselves well. So what becomes difficult for me is like it's super selfish. I think if you have the economic resources, not to treat yourself well, not to be healthy, because really the only excuse is you're either concept or you are just feigning ignorance and haven't taken the time to figure it out, even though you probably have free time, resources, all that stuff. And then we have a bigger issue because then downstream you think because you're not making the choice that it's the same for underserved communities that they're just lazy, they're not doing what they should be doing, they should be working a little bit more, when actually it can be super tough. It's not just access, right, but it's also the stress of not knowing where your next paycheck is coming from. You're still working and you're food insecure, you just can't get it done. Or so it's like, how do I even have time to educate myself if I don't even have time to figure out my work life? What am I going to do with my kids, all this stuff? So underserved communities, I often think is a structural problem, and it's on us, especially middle class and hopefully above, to do what we need to do to understand how it's done, to hopefully educate, not in a paternalistic way, but to educate, and then push, the structures that be to implement these changes that could be for the better, right? So it's just like with the stroke of a pen, you can knock out food insecurity for millions of people. So it's an engineering problem. It's not that it just is what it is. It's an engineering problem. So for underserved communities, it's like with SNAP, right? It's like you can't buy hot food on SNAP. You can't buy vitamins. You can't buy certain things. But at the end of the day, you're still allowed to go for soda, which you still should leave up for choice. But then go also the other way. Could you limit that? Or, which a lot of people don't know about, in New York, they have something called farmers market bucks, which basically you get double dollars on SNAP at the farmers market. So my
Wow.
thing often becomes, can we do nudges, which is basically soft paternalism, but then can we also like work on the micro level to educate a little bit the recipients of these things to basically help them? Because to me, one of the biggest luxuries is time. Like I've worked my ass off, yes, to get to this point where I could sit here and have a podcast interview with you. But there's also so many things outside of my control that even allow me to get on the track to possibly get here. So with underserved communities, I think a lot of it really just becomes with kind of the better off just having to advocate on their behalf, but not saying necessarily we know what is better for them, right?
Hmm.
So that's kind of how I look at it. And I don't know, I just wake up and it just blows my mind sometimes that some of the inequality that's present in the US. And I don't think we'll ever fully get rid of it, nor do we necessarily have to fully get rid of it. But there are people that are trying to make the proper choices and can't overcome inertia. And then there are people who could easily overcome inertia and then don't. So I get upset seeing underserved, but I also get upset seeing, people like us who don't make the choice to take care of themselves. And for that, I don't think there's any excuse.
Yeah. I mean, but like at this point, would you say smartphones are fairly ubiquitous? Like, people, underserved communities, like technology is this amazing thing, right? Like
Mhm.
people in this country can't afford healthy food or have access to healthy food, but yet they have like these like supercomputers in their pockets
Yeah,
24 hours a day. And with those supercomputers, meaning like their smartphones, they have access to free resources.
this is true.
So how do we like bridge that there's like a gap
Yeah.
there, obviously.
I mean, my thing is this: why did we learn anything growing up? Why? Like, did you actually care about half of the stuff you learned in school, or did you have to just show up every day?
I was like forced,
Yeah,
basically.
you were
Yeah.
forced. So the thing becomes then: is there a situation? All right. So I look at it like this: we either make it culturally relevant, or you forced, right? And I think you forced by soft nudges, right? So the thing is like, I think there's a way. So my thing is this: also, you raise a very good point with the phones. So the thought process then becomes, all right, if what I'm typically consuming on my phone is basically just minding me for data so it could sell, why aren't they nudging me in the proper directions? Or we look at it in a situation of you have to make it top of mind and super easy to use. So my thing is like, even with the CDC, their website, and there's no shade to any of these people,
Yeah.
but why is the CDC running basically a vaccine influencer campaign and not putting funds in to direct people to a website about how they could take care of themselves? Where can they buy groceries? These type of things. How can they work out? So the thing with these phones is, I think we have to make it culturally relevant. So I think that's been happening with the industry, right? $5 trillion industry, health and wellness right now. And then we have to put pressure or just do things ourselves where we just show up that then make it so. Because I think we could talk about this from a theoretical perspective all day. And I see it in New York. I'll give a really good example. Everybody in New York wants to act like they're about the greater good. You go on the subway and you see somebody beg for money. People in New York don't even look them in the eye.
Oh God, yeah.
They don't look him in the eye. They don't
So
give him a
sad.
dollar. They don't do that. So where there's this overall behavioral and cognitive gap. So we can sit back and say, oh, there's so many free resources. But one of the hardest things, I suppose, is people have directed attention fatigue and we don't know where to put it. And I think it becomes on us as stakeholders. It's you teach. So we provide a theory, but then we figure out how to make it super practical. And I think it really is with grassroots. It's like getting in the streets, right? So let's take Black Panthers, for example, right? one of the things, no matter how you feel about them, one of the main reasons we have a free breakfast program in the US is because Black Panthers were feeding these impoverished communities, right?
Mm.
And the US government took hold of this, and then they realized how powerful of a program it was, and they didn't want the Black Panthers to get good public sentiment for feeding. So they basically stopped the program and then turned it into a situation where it became federal. So the thing becomes, it's like, how does that one little switch that we do in our communities hopefully light something more? So I think it's us showing up, but also as stakeholders, which you see in the UK overseas, especially with, like Joe Wicks. I don't think he does anything that groundbreaking, but he's cultivated such a mass that then the government's trying to team up with him to do stuff. I think the future is, as experts and thought leaders, is however you want to feel about it, like we have to team up with the government. Like they're throwing money away. And
Mm.
unless we get some portion of that to like do real things in the community, I don't know how we're ever going to fix this.
So how can people? I mean, how can people help? I want to help the cause, but I mean, to be honest, when I look at my content, I don't think it's culturally relevant to the underserved communities. Like it's culturally relevant to people who are following the Paleo LCHF hashtags on Instagram. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think all of us, and look, first off, I respect you for saying that because I think all of us, whether we want to admit it or not, are kind of this, I call it deep state wellness. Like we're just part of the complex. And we're at a crossroads where it's like, we got in it for the right reasons, but it also pays our bills. We understand what people want, but what we're doing, does it actually make a difference? How can I actually change it? It's fatiguing. It's honestly fatiguing. And there's honestly huge dissonance. I look at it like this. This is just personally what I do. For all the contracts that I negotiate, I make the company pay to a charity. So for every part, if you want to work with me, I do two things. I'm not going to do an affiliate code. I don't do that. I'm going to say you're going to give away something for free. And then on the other end, you're going to donate to a charity of my choice that's connected to this because they need more help than the people on Instagram that are following me. And then from there, what I try to do is work with my brand partners or whomever or friends is basically to set up. I have something called System of Service, which is my nonprofit where we just set up super micro focused community endeavors.
Wow.
So what I think about and I look at it like this is I never want to go into a community and say I know best, even if I look like the people in our community. I want to say you've been working at this. I have access to certain things. I would like to create a structure to help you. So an example of this is with Jefferson County. Jefferson County is a county in Mississippi, probably poorest county in the U.S. Super food insecure. I saw a article over the summer about how they were basically trying to feed the kids who were out of school because of COVID, but they couldn't. They didn't have enough. All this. So I called one of my friends who is in Mississippi, Bradford Blackburn. He's like of Mississippi lineage, runs a law firm down there into politics. I was like, yo, how can we help? And things kept flowing. And now I work with one of my friends who plays for the Falcons and has his own foundation called B2B, Brandon Copeland. And now we're raising money and getting things together so we could feed these kids. So my thing is, how can we help? I think we think micro. There's two ways to create change. It's right in your back door. And then it's to push shame. If you highlight what basically people who should be taking care of these people are overlooking, then hopefully that then leads to downstream structural action. So the only thing that I can really think about is I don't believe we should be paying for problems that are our own. That's why charity kind of fucks me up. I'm like, I'm gonna have to pay money for a situation that isn't really my fault, but it'll just make me feel good if I give money. So let me figure out how to get brands or, companies to match. Let me figure out one problem I could focus on in my backyard and set up super small events and then keep it going from there because we didn't consent to existence, Max. You showed up here. You showed up. You weren't like, or maybe we did and we don't remember. We were like, yo, universe, whatever, it's time for me to go. It's time for me to hop. You showed up. And then there was a point in your life where you were like, yo, things are kind of messed up. Whether it directly, and you were like, let me try to figure this out. You wrote your great book. And now it's at the next step. You're like, things are still messed up. So I think it's like, what's that 1 to 2 degree separation that we could think we could change? Because my belief is, as cheesy as it is, if you could change one person's world, you change the world.
Yeah.
And if we could keep growing on that, I think it becomes vital.
I mean, I think spreading the message that there are simple things that people can do every day that don't cost a lot of money, that are not this super, like there's so many purists, I feel like, in our world, where if you're not eating like perfectly in accordance with like what I think our paleo ancestors ate, like there's just so many, there's this like this air of like perfection, we so often let perfect be the enemy of the good. But I don't know. I mean, are there simple, cheap, or completely free things that people can do, regardless of their financial situation, that'll have a measured impact on their health and fitness levels?
Oh yeah, for sure.
I mean, like, what's like the 80%? What's like the 20% that's going to make 80% of the progress for these people?
I think we have to take the. Are you talking about for people in general?
Well, people that are listening that might, have either be part of these underserved communities that we're
Yeah.
talking about or have access to them,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's real. I mean, I think it first starts with like with you. So it's a thought process of if we want to make it super easy, I think it's stop thinking that everything comes down to individual action, right? Like I think individual action creates structural change. But people, I mean, to an extent, they have to find the value in it for themselves, regardless of how much we talk about how great it is. I think when you help people discover that action for themselves and make it as easy as possible to show up, that changes everything. So it's there are community centers in your local spot, like doing something once a month, teaming up with these structures that already exist. And half the time, I remember in college, I did something called I think it was the Agatston Urban Nutrition Initiative. And I used to just after my classes, I would go to a local high school or middle school and just talk to these kids or
Mm.
like help them cook or do basic things. And I think with that, it's just that first, just show up at your community and give people the immediate actionable steps that matter. Because we're so caught up in work, to be honest, that we end up thinking that's the most important thing. Or, when things become so vivid online, then we immediately want to help. But there's situations again in our own backyard that I think we could change. But with us individually, with our health habits, to be honest, I think people focus on exercise too much.
Hmm.
I think exercise is like the connective tissue and it's the catalyst, but it's really everything else that makes exercise worthwhile. Like how are you eating, how are you sleeping, what's up with your mental states, those things. But I think the industrial complex has pushed such the physical activity so harsh that it turns everybody else off.
Is that because they push exercise as being an antidote to the junk food that they sell? They're like, look, buy our, packaged processed, ultra processed crap. The reason why you're obese is not because of these foods, it's because you're just not moving enough.
Yeah, you nailed it on the head. I mean, in Brooklyn, I've noticed this. I was walking around, and at the subway stops, sponsored by the big soda companies, there's basically a ad that's like less is more, basically, which talks about maybe drinking a little less soda, but just really pushing it on move more.
Wow.
And when you look at it, it's crazy, right? Because you go by these bodegas and you have these big ads targeting these young kids, but the communities are barely walkable. There's not that many green spaces. It's just saying move more. At the end of the day, let's be honest, right? And this is, I think it's Dan Lieberman has been putting a lot of good stuff out this on he wrote his recent book, Exercise. Nobody wants to work out. Why? What is the evolutionary benefit? What is, right? You want to conserve energy. You want to survive in the short term and you want to reproduce.
Right.
And Lord knows every day I wake up, I want to conserve energy, I want to reproduce,
Right.
and I want to survive in the short term.
Same.
So it's like telling people that they got to move more. It's like, what?
Yeah.
It's just, again, it makes structural issues an individual choice. And that's fucked up.
Damn, I couldn't agree more. It's so true. Especially for, like, you mentioned inertia, which is a term that I freaking love. That for somebody who's not already yet moving and like doesn't have like a fitness regimen, making like starting one is like one of the most intimidating, most difficult things I think I can imagine for that person.
Yeah. I have something called exercise snacks that I actually seen has helped with people with that because look, like
Exercise snacks.
Exercise snacks.
Tell
So
me about that.
basically, it's this thought process. So I remember in 2013, I stumbled upon this study regarding diabetic patients or pre-diabetic patients, which is rampant in the U.S. And especially, I think we're seeing that right now with COVID. Like by some estimates, 40% of deaths are from diabetic patients who make
Mm.
up 10% of the population. It's crazy.
Wow.
So with the thought process of exercise snacks, they saw instead of one 30 to 40-minute session, they broke it up at the start of the day, at the end of the day, two 15-minute exercise sessions. They made them snacks, and they realized it was actually better for their metabolic health, blood sugar, their health overall than one long. So it seems that the body is more made for basically what's called it intermittent movement consistently rather than exercise as a big chunk, a meal. So I always was sitting on this idea. I was like, this makes so much sense, but I don't know. Like everybody, the industry at the time, I suppose, just wasn't ready or whatever. Lockdown happened, and then one of my clients, Naomi Campbell, wanted to work out all the time. And then one day we were doing it. She was like, "Oh, we should go on IG Live," and I'm like, "Well, I guess so. I'm not gonna tell Naomi no." So we hop on, and then people started to join. So basically, I created this like separate page called Exercise Snacks, which is basically making movement a movement. Where I created an exercise library that was short. Everything's less than 20 minutes. It's simple. There's seated things you could do. It's basically this thought process that people don't realize is that consistent contracting of muscles to break up time goes a long way. So even some research shows like at 5 minutes of movement every 60 to 120 minutes of sitting offsets that and can still help improve your metabolic health. So the thing then becomes if we're not overwhelmed by the thought that all our workouts have to be hard, let's not even think about workouts like that because we've overlooked one key metric. You work out for fitness, you work out for performance, but nobody was talking about working out for health,
Hmm.
right? Like if say mobility based work, just moving your body, calf pumps while you sit, simple things like that. So if we could help improve that concept, then does it be and keep it short, then does it become easier to say, okay, maybe I'll start eating a little bit better because I don't have, the cognitive fatigue of hard workouts, especially at first. Can I focus on my sleep? My thing is this, whether you want to look at, James Clear or the Zen Habits guy, I think Leo, it's how do you stack things and make it as easy as possible to flow through so it's health by design. And I think when you put all the emphasis on one area, it's too overwhelming. It like why? And it takes too long to see the benefits from at least aesthetically from workouts unless you go very hard very soon, which most people can't do.
Yeah. I mean, what are some other things that you can do in that 15-minute, like as an exercise snack? Calf raises, like seated. I,
It depends if it's seated or not. But when you look at it, right, look at it three ways. So there's also something called peripheral circulation technique, which is basically when you just combine the upper body and lower body exercise, it creates a better circulation through the body.
wow.
So the easiest way to think about it, if you want to make a 15-minute workout session, an upper body exercise, a lower body exercise, a core exercise, and something just super cardio focused,
Hmm.
right? You have four exercises, do them for 30 seconds to 1 minute, cycle through it 3 to 5 times. And then you're good. And then at night, kind of say if you want to go through or in the morning, a mobility work, something to ease you down into your day. So that workout at night really just becomes, say, part of your sleep time routine, wind down routine. Now you're sleeping better. It flows into each other. And then think about actually working in what we call standard exercise or fitness into your week. And for most people, they overdo it. Like I'm big into minimum effective dosages, especially if you're busy. You really only need to do max two hit sessions per week for minimum effective dosage. And to be honest, you get one true strength session in, and then you get some low to medium intensity, just kind of consistent cardio if you can,
Hmm.
right? And that becomes so much easier. Now you're feeling better. And look at it like this: your body then just processes everything better, right? Your metabolic state becomes better, your blood pressure drops, your resting heart rate drops. You then if you work out at the right times, it's easier to go to sleep. How do things flow into each other instead of looking at them segmented? And I think as I've aged and the people who I've worked with, has become key because there is so much kind of wasted time in between, let's say, those periods. And I look at life as a class, right? It's in college. What I had to do was make the best flow of a class schedule because I knew I had other things going on. And I think if we do the same with our life, it becomes a lot easier.
Yeah, dude, what you're saying is so brilliant, and it's particularly relevant to me because I haven't. I mean, I told you I haven't worked out. I haven't gone to the gym in 2 weeks, 3 weeks at this point. And so I love the idea of these short, exercise snacks. Really, really smart. Um, and so when it comes to then, I feel like I've heard you on a podcast previously talking about when it comes to diet, um, you're more interested in like I don't know if I'm phrasing this the right way, but the things that people can add in as opposed to what they, become obsessed with taking out of
Yeah.
their diets. Or did I have that the right way, or did I
Yeah,
flip
no,
it?
you're right. It's like inclusion instead of exclusion.
Hmm.
I think with everything, because the thing becomes, it's not what I'm not. My thing is this: if I tell you to do something, that would reduce your likelihood of not doing something that you
Hmm.
shouldn't be doing.
Hmm.
So instead of telling a kid, not to say we're kids, but instead of telling a kid, "Oh, you can't do that," what if I told the kid they could do something else, and then all of a sudden they either reduce or stop doing the thing they shouldn't be doing?
Hmm.
So, and even if I would tell a client, "Okay, you can't eat this anymore," they're automatically going to ask, "Well, what can I eat?" So instead of this situation with food where we always want to go, oh, you should never eat this, you should only eat raw foods, or you should only eat meat, or only do this, that. I think it's all crazy and more respect to them. But like, you got everybody from, carnivore diets, paleo that's protein focused, to paleo that's carb focused, to vegan, to raw vegan, to some people who say they don't eat, they just breathe.
Yeah,
Yeah,
breatharians.
I'm like, the fuck is going on? So my thing is also keeping it real and be like, yo, like, what if you just included this, see what works, and it creates kind of also a little bit of elimination diet without it being eliminating in the sense of the mind. So that because then later, if we want to add in that food again, then you have a better idea of how the person responds. But I don't think people do well with restriction, and I take that from kind of a public health perspective too, because you also see people often make beneficial changes when they're incentivized, not when they're penalized.
Hmm.
So, life is hard enough. Like, I got to tell somebody that they can't do something again. It's like, hold up. What if you just ate a few more fruits and vegetables, or, you got more water into the day? It's a crazy stat. Like, only 12% of the US population gets enough fruits and vegetables.
Yeah.
And that's off that's off the food pyramid, which is basically just a commodity structure. So, who knows if we actually need more? And it's crazy stuff like that. So, yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't like to do it from a reductionist view.
Yeah, I think it's always more. There's just a more positive sort of morale to when like have to add stuff to your diet as opposed to feeling like you're embracing a diet from a place of restriction.
Yeah, I think you got to make things a game. Like, you got to gamify. Yeah, you got to gamify existence to a second. And then you start to notice when you're including certain foods, typically energy levels start to improve, things like that. And especially I work with a lot of models in my day. They had such a negative relationship with food.
Oh yeah.
I'm like, the hell is going on? Like they were told so often what they couldn't eat. And it's hyper in that world, but it's still kind of the same. And my thing was like, let me help people understand what they can eat and then make the decision for them once they want to formulate like their eating kind of design practice as it pertains. But to talk in absolutes, I think is an affront to science. It's not science, it's scientism. It's different. So I can't.
Dude, I love that. It's so true. Yeah, I feel like, and there's a lot of these like zealots online, whether it's the carnivore dieters or some of the you're plant based, but you don't strike me as like somebody who's like trying to push the way that you eat
No,
onto other people.
no.
But there is a lot of that absolutism
It
in the
sells.
wellness world. Yeah.
It sells. I mean, like, my thing is this, and I'm gonna be honest. I made a very deliberate, I made a very deliberate decision in the beginning of my career that while I turned this into a living, it's also still a passion project. It's human experimentation to an extent, and the way I would make my money would not simply be the same as how I share my thoughts, my theories, how it pertains to health and wellness. Other people don't have that luxury. I luckily work with a lot of other companies and brands and other projects that are fortunate to pay my bills. But if there's a situation where you in a polarized time, everything is connected to a thought process that eventually then turns into some sort of money, whether that's PragerU, whether that's Infowars, whatever, it turns into a money scheme. So that's really what's unfortunate when it comes to health, that health has become a monetary scheme, whether that be with, what's his name? I mean, Asprey is an easy one, but there's also, Mark who did, kind of he was like the father of paleo, first brought that along. He sold it for tens of millions of dollars.
Mark Sisson?
Yeah. All of them is connected to a product. So the thing becomes, and I think as the industry ages, it's like I don't have an issue if you're connecting it with a product if you teach people to critically think, right? Like you wrote a book. So if somebody takes the time to read that book and supports you for reading that book, that's very much different than somebody say telling you that well, here's the way. All right, and also here's my supplement, here's this, here's that. So I think it's as a responsibility to like teach people to critically think, like to be open. And the thing, if you take a hard line early on, you can't change it later, which
Yeah.
kind of fucks you up.
Yeah. There's some of these like carnivore guys now who I won't name them, but they start. I literally had some of them on my podcast who, the first time they came on my podcast were like they didn't eat anything but meat, beef, salt, and water, and now they're promoting that they've basically like done a 180 and now they're basically just doing like a modified paleo diet and they're still calling it like they're eating fruits.
Nah, I'll call him out. What's his name's like that? Paul Sedino or whatever, who went the stuff he put the remembering. I'm like, come on, bro. Sean Baker when he tries to do those TikToks where he's just going at these guys. I'm like, it's the same pathology that vegan dude you're making fun of and yours. And it's just like, why are we at the end of the day, why are we doing this? You can't say it's because you're trying to improve health or do this or do that. You are making a lot of money off of this, off of these exaggerated claims. And it's problematic because, again, look at anything, right? Remember when we thought the atom was the plum pudding model? Remember when the dude who the theory of evolution was that a giraffe had a long neck because it was trying to reach its leaves?
Yeah.
Everybody at the time thought what they were saying was the most valid thing. And for us at this point to do this at a time when there truly is a public health crisis, there truly is, and not just bringing up these things just for some sort of self-serving adulation and to be noble and to say everybody's talking about vaccines, but nobody's talking about metabolic health. It's like, all right, hold up. What are you doing? What are you doing? Not just to change the conversation around you. So hopefully you might get on a Joe Rogan show or something. What are you doing to actually make a difference, right? And I think that's what becomes important. And I'm not trying to throw stones or anything. I mean, I suppose I could be a lot more bigger if I just really took those stances. But I'm just saying, like, what if at the end of the day, we all just put aside our seeming differences and we said, yo, like, we all are intelligent in some capacity. Let's try to figure this problem out. Let's honestly try to figure this problem out, even if we have to start small. And that, I just think that, like, I don't know, those sparring just to spar, it's like, why?
Dude, it's I'm glad you said it. It's definitely a problem, and I don't have anything against any one individual person. I think I actually am very entertained by Sean Baker, and
It's funny. I laugh.
yeah, and but I agree that sometimes the motivations can be obfuscated by the fact that like it just seems that that sometimes they aim to be inflammatory just for the sake of being inflammatory or for getting attention or for furthering their products, whatever that happens to be.
Yeah, and you put it with a nice hashtag. You got Vicurious, which actually I kind of respect David, for doing a little bit, but it's just like what? It's like adult TikTok. You know what I mean? It's like we all each have our little dance that we're trying to get other people to do the same dance. And I don't really get it.
Yeah.
But I don't know.
Who do you think's doing it well? Who are some other people that you respect?
Uh who's doing it well in the industry? There's a guy I'm been super into actually like how people are approaching the COVID problem. And
Hmm.
there's this doctor out of Harvard who's been really interesting with I can't remember his name, but he's been really interesting with the way he's been approaching both the vaccine and the testing strategy. He doesn't think that we have the testing strategy properly figured out in the US.
There's a guy Jay Bhattacharya at Harvard. Is that the
Oh,
guy?
him too.
Maybe. Yeah,
That's a
he's
different
good.
guy though. Um, I've always liked how the founder of Precision Nutrition does it. I
Hmm.
think he open sources his information really well. His name escapes me right now. I often look at a lot of guys in the performance world, like
Hmm.
because since they deal with athletes and sport, they can't even the dude at Apex, Bobby Stroop, who does work with Patrick Mahomes. It's like because their work is so tied into athlete development, which is often grounded in nutrition and physical world, they don't have to do hyperbole. Like they just have to produce results and then they open source the information to hopefully let you know what's working. But I would love, and I would continue to look, but I would love to see that more on like a public health level, which I haven't completely seen. But there is also the guy who's doing who took a he did a TED talk on brain health and how he's doing brain scans.
Daniel Amen.
Yes,
Yeah.
I've been super intrigued by him, and then I've been digging into triage theory by Dr. Ames a bit, which has changed the way I'm looking at kind of mineral and vitamin supplementation slightly. But yeah, I mean, I'm either in like PubMed or I'm super into kind of performance sport world.
Yeah, I love that. Damn,
What
man.
about you? What are you interested in right now?
Um, well, having just come off of my COVID experience, I'm just trying to get back to like my own shit, like my own, my own routine. Um, I haven't been able to work out in 2 weeks, 3 weeks. So I'm honestly just my focus has really been on myself for the past 3 weeks, is what I'm trying to say. But yeah, I mean, I like to expose myself to as broad an array of perspectives as I can, and to form my own sort of opinion about things. I also take into account like data and research, but I also, there are definitely people who, um, I like to follow people who are like heterodox, meaning they don't
Mm,
really toe party lines, and kind of just form like a stew in my brain of like all these different perspectives. And that's sort of like, for the past couple of weeks, at least for me, has been really just like, thinking about COVID and thinking about, the vaccine stuff, just because it's what I personally have been dealing with. But uh, beyond that, I mean, from a nutrition standpoint, I mean, I really value what you were saying about like absolutism. I continue like I don't think that I've my views have really changed that much from that side of things. I still continue to really be convinced that properly raised animal products, whole colorful plants, that both really are sort of optimal from the standpoint of, you know not just physical performance, but for long-term health, brain health, cardiovascular health, and the like. And yeah, and I just, that's pretty much it. I mean, no major revelations, which I think is actually like a good thing,
yeah, I
you
think
know?
so too. What do you feel like? I'm interested on your take on plants. Like, where do you sit on this whole anti nutrient concept?
I think I actually don't think about them. I mean, I think legumes are a wonderful source of protein, fiber. I don't think that they're as high quality as like a lean chicken breast, or or a whole egg. But I'm not averse to legumes. I'm almost every day I consume a salad that has white beans in it and has kale in it. Oh my God, like two of the things that like
Gonna kill you.
that are going to kill you. Um, in the context of a balanced, and balanced in air quotes, because I know that balanced has sort of been, the term has been bastardized by like what did you call the food pyramid?
It's
Or
just a commodities business.
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, but I mean, in the context of a diet that has a diverse array of animal proteins and whole plants, I think it's splitting hairs to worry about anti nutrients. And also, but when you prepare them, when you cook them, you're deactivating
Yeah.
most of them anyway. Um, I think that for somebody who is healthy, who has a robust, microbiome, a healthy immune system, I think that these kinds of plant toxins only are going to strengthen the system.
Have you heard of that? Have you heard of that theory? It's basically that the reasons why plants are good for us is because they're actually trying to kill us slightly.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, it's like a
I'm pretty familiar.
super
Yeah,
eustress energy. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I just don't. Yeah, I guess everybody's just kind of splitting hairs.
yeah. Well, think about like exercise. Exercise is good for you because it's bad for you.
Yeah,
It's a form of stress,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
That if
yeah.
you were to do constantly,
You
for
die.
16 hours a day, yeah, it would kill you ultimately. Sitting in a sauna.
Yeah.
I was in a sauna yesterday that was literally at the same temperature that I use to slow roast ribs. So you're literally cooking yourself. Okay.
Yeah.
And it's good for you because it's bad for you in a way. So that whole concept of like hormesis, environmental hormesis, I'm a huge fan. And I think the same thing is true for plants and xenohormesis or whatever,
Yeah.
whatever the term is. Symbiotic phytoadaptation is what Mark Hyman calls it, which I think is actually quite a beautiful way to think about it. That when you consume a plant, whether it's a wild plant or an organic plant or even a conventionally raised plant, it has phytochemicals in it that were developed by the plant to ensure its survival, and that vigor, that robustness gets passed down to you when you eat it,
Yeah.
which I think is like the most beautiful, cool thing. Why would anybody want to like subvert that and throw that away?
I
That's
mean, trying to pad their accounts, I
there
guess.
you go. Yeah, man. There's a lot. I'm glad that we have people like you in the space that are helping, be a beacon and and put out good content because I mean, there are a lot of people putting out content, and I think that as you mentioned, like at a certain point, it becomes really more about the bottom line than it does about actually helping people, or not even necessarily about the bottom line, but it's about saving face because you've had this hard line for so many
Yeah.
years that you just can't go backwards now at this point because you'd look like an idiot. I'm always willing to share where I've been wrong and where my perspective has changed. And yeah, and I get the vibe that you're right there with me.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think there's any other way to do it. And then I honestly, I think that's where the industry is going. I think like people want true, unbiased, whatever experts or thought leaders, or at the end of the day, what we all really are to an extent are just extra qualified reporters with a little bit more skin in the game. So why are you trying to put excess spin on stories that don't really need it?
Yeah. Do you think that there is a shift happening where people are kind of steering away from maybe like because I feel like over the past couple of decades, there was a certain kind of thought leader in the health and wellness space. It was an author, and then you know, and then for a while they would sort of gain most of the like they would become these like beacons on social media because there was a dearth of other voices that were perhaps more credible or more flexible or more, inquisitive. But now I feel like social media, that you're seeing a lot of like actual scientists like come
Hmm.
on the platform and start podcasts and embrace science communication. But
Yeah,
then also
Huberman does that really well.
Huberman does
He's
that really
having a
well.
moment.
Yeah, he's great. He is having a moment.
Yeah. Um, maybe. I mean, I think millennials are aging. I think we've become tired in this past couple years have shown that. I think it becomes a situation where uh people just don't want to consume for the sake of. They also want to participate, and their kind of thought process has also been raised. So then the people that are looking forward to are, I don't know, either cultural mavens or people who put it in a way to digest information to turn it into knowledge. It's like I look at it like this: like Tony Hawk when he did the 720, it was crazy. Like nobody ever thought he could do that, and now
What was that?
the X Games, like Tony Hawk did the skateboard 720
Hmm.
spin, but now like a couple months ago, a 15-year-old did a 1080. And it's this constant evolution of like once time passes that people continue to build upon prior knowledge. And it also like I think the cognitive map of the common consumer is going to continue to raise.
Hmm.
So yeah, I mean, I think it's people who present information in a way that's easily digestible, which you do, and you do it very open. And I think that's the key because what that allows them to do, which you see, is that people in your comments talk to each other. You foster participation. And whether you agree with what the people are saying or not, it doesn't matter. You're fostering participation. And I think in this day and age when it's often kind of not illegal, but it's often seems so difficult to have conversations openly. That's key. But I don't know. We'll see where the industry goes. But I'm super big Web 3.0 guy. I think everything gets decentralized, and I think people are going to want to have these communities in which they can participate with each other, both online and offline. And then for something that's so hands on, like health, that's the way forward. But like, I don't know. I'm inspired to see like what's the new Weight Watchers going to be. Like, what is that for us? It's a more multi faceted, holistic energy. I kind of think that's the future.
Hey guys, if you enjoyed that conversation, you're gonna love this one.
As the ancestral health movement has sort of evolved. It started in the early days, and hats off to Lauren Cordain and the anti-grain movement. And I think Joe Mercola was one of the early anti-grain guys as well. But this idea that all grains are antithetical to health, all grains are bad for you, and so you talk about wheat and rye and millet and corn. And corn is considered a grain, which it is. It's a grass seed. However, when we talk about the properties of corn that we're not that wild about, the lectins and the phytates and the tightly wound zyme, the tightly wound proteins, we're typically speaking about the grain product that's derived from corn that's used to make processed goods that you would find in cookies and crackers and corn and bread and things like that. But sweet corn is it's more of a vegetable in that vegetable category than it is in that grain category. And I'm from Maine, and really, a Maine clam bake was lobster, clams, and corn. And it wasn't a clam bake or a lobster bake without corn.
Without the corn.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not like, I think a lot of people have seen that documentary King Corn, and just the overall, the fact that corn today is in everything, and that's I think a problem. But like, if you're metabolically healthy and you're metabolically flexible, which is something that I'm going to talk to you about, I don't see any problem with having like a nice organic corn on the cob in the summer. I mean, it's not, like alongside your ribeye or whatever it is that you're eating,
So, my take from the beginning has been that all these foods that we talk about exist on a spectrum.
Yeah.
And some are wonderful and fabulous and fantastic for you, and some of them aren't that good. And for some people who have certain sensitivities, whether it's nightshades or whether it's a gluten sensitivity, some foods can be, damaging and life-altering if they go down that path. But in between, there are a lot of places that we can play.
Yeah.
And I like to look at every food sort of, for its own merit. So, we can talk about sulforaphanes, right? We can talk about broccoli and cauliflower and Brussels sprouts and all of the purported benefits that they have, and yet some people have issues with these types of food. So at the end of the day, we are all kind of an experiment of one. What I've offered with the Primal Blueprint, and I know you have with Genius Foods, is a template. And from that template, play around and experiment and observe and notice how you feel. And that's really, when this is all said and done, this is about enjoying life.
Yeah.
We are here to enjoy life. And if part of enjoying life is having great food with great company and great conversation, if great food can involve the widest variety of taste sensations, then that's a good thing.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, and I really appreciate that message of balance. Because I feel like in the nutrition community, what we see is like there's all these factions, right? And they tend to be very religious about like their nutritional ideology. Whether it's vegans or carnivores or people who are like strict paleo. And so, I really appreciate the more experience I have and the more exposure that I have to the sort of internet nutrition world, the more I appreciate like messages like yours.
Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah. So, metabolic flexibility is a term that you hear come up a lot, and you talk a lot about it. And I think there's a lot of sort of like confusion about what that means, what it implies. What is metabolic flexibility?
Well, metabolic flexibility is this capacity that the human body has to extract energy from a variety of different energy substrates. If you are metabolically flexible, you can derive energy from the fat that's stored on your ass or your hips or your thighs.
What are you trying to say, Mark? What are you trying to say?
Not you in particular, but ones.
Yes.
Metabolic flexibility not only means burning off stored body fat, but being able to combust the food on your plate, the fats on your plate, the carbohydrates on your plate, convert them to glucose, burn that glucose in the bloodstream for fuel, burn the glycogen that the glucose becomes in the muscles or the liver for fuel. It involves, in the absence of glucose, the liver's ability to make ketones and use ketones for fuel. So if you're metabolically flexible, you not only derive energy from all these different substrates, the best part of it is you just it's fluid. It doesn't. You don't have to think about it. You don't have to be conscious about, oh, I ate this and now I can only do these types of activities. The body adapts in a way that is seamless and doesn't care whether you got the fat from your plate of food or from your hips. Doesn't care whether the glucose came from a slab of bread that you just ate or the glycogen in your muscles. And it doesn't even, in many cases, doesn't even know. That glucose is in the bloodstream, it's available, the muscles can use it. So the metabolic flexibility part of this, which seems to be kind of intuitively obvious to a lot of people, the problem is, throughout our lives, while we have this genetic wiring that allows us to achieve metabolic flexibility, our food choices from very early on, typically dictated by our parents in the first place, have kind of led us down this path of carbohydrate dependency. And so when the body is presented with a lot of carbohydrate, the carbohydrate converts to glucose. The body doesn't like to have a lot of glucose in the bloodstream at any one time. There are a couple of mechanisms to get rid of it. One is to convert it to glycogen in the muscles. If the muscles are full of glycogen, another strategy is to send it to the fat cells and store that as triglycerides or fat in the fat cells. And ultimately, the body does what it can to try and rid itself of excess glucose. And that's fine. We know how all of us are very good at burning glucose, but glucose doesn't require the metabolic machinery that fats do. So you don't really have to have a lot of mitochondrial activity for muscles to burn glucose. It'll happen in the cytosol or the center of the cell.
That's very interesting. You mentioned that the last time that we chatted, and I thought that was a fascinating insight. That so you basically like strengthen your mitochondria by burning fat in a way?
Right. So just to take this one more step down the path of achieving metabolic flexibility, when you don't cease to eat meals, in other words, when you eat 3 square meals a day and you have carbohydrate at every meal and you don't let yourself go 3 or 4 hours without eating, and typically that's because you are hungry or your blood sugar drops and you feel low and you need to have something to top off your blood sugar. That's sort of a typical scenario for most people of the last several decades who are carb dependent. When you do that, you never tap into your body fat stores. And when you never tap into your body fat stores, the body says, look, I don't need to build any machinery to burn fat because we're not burning fat. This clown is feeding me carbohydrate all the time, like every 2 or 3 hours, all day long. It's breakfast, the most important meal of the day, followed by a 10:30 coffee break, followed by lunch, followed by an afternoon pick-me-up, or else I'll have to take a nap, followed by dinner, and then maybe something while you're watching TV before you go to bed. And this is a problem with civilization that's made all of this food so available and so handy and so tasty that we tend to kind of rely on that. And as such, we never build this metabolic machinery. So the way to do this and the way to develop metabolic flexibility is to cut the carbs, is to reduce the amount of glucose that your body has access to. In so doing, a number of genetic signaling devices take place. And this includes more enzymes to take fat out of storage, what we call mitochondrial biogenesis, the building of more mitochondria, which is where the fat actually burns inside the cells. An improvement in mitochondrial efficiency, so even the mitochondria that you do have become more efficient at extracting energy from fat. And through all of this, a number of great things happen. First of all, you become able to generate energy all day long, whether you eat or not. So because we all have this ability to store extra calories as fat, this fuel that we carry around with us all the time. And as a result of that access to energy all the time, hunger, appetite, and cravings kind of dissipate, and in many cases, like almost disappear. You become so efficient at burning calories, burning energy in the absence of eating, that you can do 80, 85, 90% of the work that you would do in the gym just burning fat, just burning stored body fat. So it's a amazing kind of adaptation that all of us have, and it's really a result of millions of years of evolution through a period of time when food was really, really scarce. When food is scarce, it's not like, well, you don't eat 3 meals a day, you only eat 1 meal a day. No, when food is scarce, it's like you eat 1 meal and then you might not eat for 2 or 3 days. And our ability to survive that sort of those harsh conditions relied on us overeating that 1 meal because we had no means of storing. There's no refrigeration, there was no smoking and other means of storing it. So we developed this system where we could overeat and turn the excess calories into energy that we carried around with us, conveniently located right above the center of gravity. So you don't even have to put your fuel in a 5-gallon bucket and lug it around or in a backpack. It's like a fanny pack, literally, right over your hips. And that's really one of the most elegant and amazing systems in the human body, is this ability to
store fat.
To store fat. And we all have that, to the chagrin of many of us. And really now the challenge is to figure out a way to be able to combust that fat, burn that stored body fat off, use it for fuel, not just to have access to energy all day long, but to achieve an ideal body composition, to normalize blood sugar, to normalize blood lipids, reduce risk factors for cancer, heart disease, diabetes, metabolic syndrome, and all the things that we talk about. So in that regard, I would say that the pursuit of metabolic flexibility really is the holy grail of health. If you are metabolically flexible, everything else falls into place. Conversely, if you're not metabolically flexible, it becomes more difficult to try and work your way around it by exercising your way into that system or that situation, or taking medications. People are taking metformin for their blood sugar management, and sometimes they're taking statins for their lipid management, and these are all really kind of bass-backwards way of trying to reduce risk factors, when in fact just achieving metabolic flexibility will get you there.
Did you say bass-backwards?
Yeah, I did.
I like that.
It's a word.
No, but it really sets up such an elegant operating system. Like the people who were our ancestors that were most efficient at storing fat, that got fat the easiest.
Yeah.
Those are the ones that survived.
They survived. They lived long enough to pass the genes along to the next generation. So it's literally, you can argue that, people will say, I'm fat because my parents were fat and I inherited that gene. Well, good for you, because if you go back far enough, that's the line of survivors, and everyone else kind of died out.
1,000%.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just amazing. And the amount of energy that we can store in our fat, that for people to not be metabolically flexible, it's like, you're undermining millennia of adaptation and evolution and natural selection. I mean, I'm just going to do some math out loud. So you can store about 500 grams of carbohydrates in your body. That's it, right? About 100 in your liver, 400 in your muscles. So that's multiplied by 4, that's 2,000 calories.
Yep.
You can store 2,000 calories of sugar,
Yep.
In your body. But you store 3,000 calories in just a single pound of fat.
Right. Yeah, so I'm 10% body fat, and I'm 170 pounds. So I have 17 pounds of fat. So let's say some of that fat is necessary for other functions beyond fuel and combustion. So if I have 12 pounds of fat on me, times 3,000 calories per pound, that is 36,000 calories worth. That's enough for me to walk 360 miles without eating.
Wow.
And without suffering the consequences, provided that I'm metabolically flexible. Now, here's where it gets really kind of dicey. People who haven't done the work to become metabolically flexible, they're still at the effect of this carbohydrate dependency. So if I go 3 days without eating, because I've done the work and I'm metabolically flexible, as I said, my body really doesn't even know that I'm getting the energy from my body's fat stores, and it doesn't care, and it doesn't. There's no ill effects from it. I still, because I'm making ketones, my brain is happy because of the ketones. I'm burning fat to do most of the work. That fat's already on me, and I have a lot of it, as we just described, even at a low body fat. One of the closed loop system concepts that happens as a result of not eating for days, if you're metabolically flexible, is that certain genes are turned on that spare amino acids and spare protein. So you literally recycle proteins much more efficiently, so you don't even need an external supply of protein during this time. So if you're metabolically flexible, you won't even lose much in the way of muscle mass if you go days without eating. Now, the converse of that is if you're carb dependent and you skip one meal, you get hangry and you get out of sorts. And if you skip 2 days of not eating, because you haven't done the work and haven't built the metabolic machinery, the brain kind of goes, wait a minute, I'm supposed to get glucose all the time. And you cut off my glucose, what am I going to do? I haven't learned how to burn ketones efficiently yet. And so the liver's pumping out these ketones, and you're spilling them out in your breath and your urine and your blood. And dude, I'm in ketosis. I'm 5 millimolar. I'm 6 millimolar. It doesn't matter. If you haven't done the work yet to do that, you're sort of wasting that precious fuel. So when you when you don't eat and you're a carbohydrate dependent person, and the body still thinks it needs carbs to run on and glucose to run on, then the brain sends a signal to the adrenals. The adrenals secrete cortisol, a stress hormone. And you've maybe heard this when people do inappropriate fasts and they haven't prepared for the fast yet, and their cortisol levels go up. Well, cortisol basically tears down muscle tissue throughout the body, sends it to the liver so that it can be made into glucose to fuel the brain and to do these activities. So you're literally cannibalizing your own body in a way that if you're metabolically flexible, not even an issue. But if you haven't built this metabolic flexibility, that's why you get into problems with carb-dependent people doing 3-day fasts and 4-day fasts.
And it's interesting because it's a lot easier, and correct me if I'm wrong, to create glucose from protein than it is from fat, because it's not as efficient, right? Because in fat you can get the glycerol off of the triglyceride.
Right. And so in the model that I talked about, where if I were to go 3 days without eating, or our buddy Peter Attia, which he does routinely, he does 5-day fast all the time. You can say this is such an efficient system because the triglyceride, that is the fat molecule that's being combusted, those 3 fatty acid molecules, they get combusted. Some get sent to the liver to become ketones, which is a fuel that the brain can use. But the glycerol can be used in the manufacture of whatever small amount of glucose is still required. So you can go days without any glucose at all, and the body will make glucose from that glycerol and won't need to cannibalize muscle tissue the way it would in somebody who is not fat adapted and keto adapted.
Wow. There's the whole notion of like fat oxidation versus fat loss, I think sometimes comes up in like the fitness community, the sort of evidence-based, using air quotes, fitness community that's very calorie, they tend to be very calorie focused. So what's the distinction between fat oxidation, which is like the burning of fat, and fat loss for people? Is there a difference?
No, I mean you have to oxidize the fat in order to burn it, in order to lose it. We talk a lot about endurance athletics and the idea that the better you are at burning fat, the longer you can go in terms of endurance athletics. And so I was a marathon runner in the 70s, and I was a triathlete in the 80s, did Ironman a couple of times. And the idea there was, as you said, if you only have 2,000 calories worth of glycogen in your muscles, and by the way, that's 1,600 in your muscles and 100 in your liver. So it's even fewer available to the working muscles. Because the liver glycogen is pretty much reserved for the brain, or more essential activities than locomotion. So the idea has always been to be as good at burning fat as you possibly could. But the assumption was that it was still going to be about carbohydrate management. So when in the 70s and 80s and even 90s, when I was competing and coaching, those were the years, the decades of carbo loading. So you always went out and carbo loaded. You overloaded on carbs because the recognition was that you're going to burn through them and you're going to need more of them immediately. If you were training, it was carbo loading every single day because you're going to go out and run 15 miles today and 20 tomorrow and 10 the next day. And there was never really much attention paid to becoming really, truly fat adapted in keto. In the last decade, a number of athletes have done really well with this ketogenic training and becoming so good at burning fat that they can run literally 6-minute miles, getting 97% of all that caloric requirement from fat and not having to dip into their glycogen stores so much.
Wow.
Yeah.
Is being in keto, is keto like a sort of calorie restriction mimetic? And if so, I guess my question would be like, for an endurance athlete who's chronically in ketosis, wouldn't that be like a stress on the body?
Yeah, it's definitely a stress, and I think you'll find a lot of a stress for an endurance athlete, because an endurance athlete is doing something that is not a particularly smart thing to do for humans, and that is to to run at the highest possible output for the longest possible time. You know, historically, humans are designed to conserve energy and to not want to work that hard and to not want to run that long. If you go back, 10,000 years and you suggest, hey, let's go for a 10-mile run, and your buddy says, well, what are we hunting? And you said, no, we're just going to go out for fun and get a workout.
Yeah.
He would go, you're crazy.
You're insane.
That's a life-threatening activity. So the idea of endurance competition and endurance performance now is so antithetical to human health that you kind of, again, have to you kind of put the component parts together, and you say, well, if you're going to do this, then here's how you can do it with the least amount of damage. If you're going to do this, I'm going to train you to be metabolically flexible. So I'm going to use a ketogenic diet for some of that. I'm not going to do it all the time. And so a lot of the guys who are the top keto performers, they don't spend the whole time in ketosis. In fact, it's not wise for them to do that. They develop this metabolic flexibility through either ketogenic dieting or time-restricted feeding, or a combination of the two, or some amount of fasting, and they literally train the body to build more of these enzyme systems, more of these mitochondria, and kind of upregulate all of that fat-burning capacity. And then, having said that, they don't lose their ability to burn carbs. They don't lose their ability to burn glucose or glycogen. So at any point in time, they can top off their glycogen stores. And that's really what they do when they race. It's a combination of fat dominant energy systems, but also supplemented with some amount of carbs if it gets to that. And now you're just trying to find where that fine line is, where you don't hit the wall and have to drop out of the race.
Yeah, because you never lose the ability to use glucose.
Right.
You just enhance your ability to burn fat.
Exactly.
But that ability to burn glucose when you need it is always going to be there.
No, it's, if you tell me, well, I went to a birthday party last night and I had, a piece of cake and I feel like crap. Well, why do you feel like crap? First of all, if you're metabolically flexible, it'll just get, stored as glycogen.
Yeah.
And if it's an issue for you, go give me 50 air squats and we'll handle that right away.
Yeah.
But I get a little bit frustrated with the keto community, who spends so much time measuring and just sort of determining how good they are at keto, that you hear stories of people who say, well, I've been keto for 2 months, but then I had a day or two where I had 80 grams of carbs and I got kicked out of ketosis. And I'm like, okay, what does that look like? Well, I felt like crap and I couldn't move for 2 days. And I'm like, well, that's you were out of ketosis, but you're not metabolically flexible yet, because the point here is to always feel good and to not really think about like what gustatory mistake you just made and have to rethink it or feel guilty about it, because you're metabolically flexible enough to just move on to the next thing, and you've got access to these different substrates.
So is getting metabolically flexible just a combination of fasting and being in ketosis for a certain period of time, before which you can then...
After which, yeah, sure. I mean, it's a tool. I think keto is a strategy, a tool in a toolbox. The more time you can be keto, the more refined you can be, the better an edge you can put on your metabolic flexibility. Some people spend a lot of time in keto. I'm in and out all the time. Some days I'm keto for 4 days in a row, and other days I might have 175 or 225 grams of carbs if I look back on the day.
Yeah.
But for the most part, it's not just the macro element of my diet. It's not just the fat and fats and protein and lack of carbohydrate, it's often my choice of when I eat. Some days I go dinner to dinner without eating. And some days when I have lunch, I'm like, Jesus, I really didn't even lunch. I didn't need lunch. It's more a habit than anything else. I could easily go dinner to dinner to dinner. And that's one of the sort of realizations you come to when you become metabolically flexible is we eat too damn much food. I mean, all of us do. And even those of us who can get away with it. And that's the other, there are a lot of people who don't ostensibly gain weight and look like they're at the effect of their food choices, but who are probably not as healthy as they could be if they took a real good hard look at what's going on the inside.
Would you say that hunger then is like a sign of metabolic inflexibility?
Yeah, I would. To a point, obviously. I mean, there's a point at which you can go only so long, and the body says, "Hey, dude, you got to eat."
Yeah.
I mean,
I
it's
get
like you and I talked about. The cold plunge.
Yeah.
The cold plunge. You can get in that water for 10 seconds or 15 seconds, and it's brisk, and you can get out. Whew, that was wonderful. But then, as you start to challenge yourself and see how long you can stay in, 4 minutes and 5 minutes and 7 minutes, at some point, it's no longer a beneficial hormetic experience. Now you're just having a contest with your, to see, it's a long ball contest basically about, how long, and that's one of the reasons I like the cold, because it's a mind game, but you have to be careful about where you set that limit, and it ceases being a good, positive, hormetic, beneficial experience, and now becomes something that could actually put you over the edge.
Yeah,
and that's possible in eating too. I mean, you can go. I have friends who do 4 and 5 day fasts a lot, and I'm like, I think that's too much. I'm not.
To me, it's a little disordered. I'm not an expert in eating disorders.
No, but that's what I'm saying. So, a 5 day fast or 6 day fast, once a year as a, some sort of homage to your diet and some whatever, that's great. But there's a point at which these become, as you said, disordered. So that's probably, I think, what I try to teach more than anything else with the Primal Blueprint, with Mark's Daily Apple, with the Keto Reset Diet, is this notion of intuitive eating. Like, there's a point beyond which you will not get greater returns. And sometimes there's a point beyond which it'll start to diminish and you'll lose some of the benefits. So I want you to understand enough about how your body works that you can do some work, you can build some metabolic flexibility, and then just freaking enjoy your life and enjoy every bite of food you ever eat and appreciate it for what it is, and experience the world, and don't get so caught up in the hacking and the measuring and the challenges of all this. And that's really been my kind of my mantra for the company is live awesome, right? And that's really what at the end of the day, that's what we all want to do. We all want to get the greatest amount of pleasure and fulfillment and contentment and enjoyment out of whatever moments we can. And to the extent that I'm struggling through another 4 day fast and trying to stay on this track of perfect eating, that doesn't fit the model of an awesome life in my book.
Yeah, I agree with that. People always ask me if I've ever done any extended fasts, like more than a 24-hour, maybe a 30. I feel like the most I've ever done is a 36-hour fast. But people have asked me if I've ever done any of these like 3, 4 day, 5 day fasts, and my answer is no. And I'm just like, and they ask me why, and I'm like, well, why would I want to do that? I don't have any need to. I'm at a body composition that I'm happy with. My labs are always generally pretty good. So
no, I mean, other than a personal challenge to see if you could do it. Look, I did 50 marathons, and I've spent the last 2 decades trying to convince people not to do marathons because they're bad for you.
Wow.
So there's a point at which I will say, if you want to do a marathon, I'll coach you how to do a marathon. And we'll get through this. And actually, I'll let people do 2 marathons. I'll let you do one to see if you can finish. And if you liked it and you think you can go faster, I'll let you do one more. And if you do that one more and you're a man and you haven't broken 3 hours, or you're a woman and you haven't done 3:30, I'm like, find a new sport. This is not for you. All this is going to do is just beat you up.
And just before we close the loop on metabolic flexibility, so would you say it's like about 2 weeks, two to 4 weeks? Like, what is that like induction period like? Like, how long does that take?
2 to 4 weeks is a good number. In my book, The Keto Reset Diet, it's basically a 6-week program. But it's 6 weeks, kind of like once a year. It's a reset, and which isn't to say that you go off the wagon after 6 weeks. What it means is you're pretty strict about the keto part of it for 6 weeks, but then the occasional meal that has some starchy tubers or some rice or something in it isn't going to derail you. It's going to be part of that whole metabolic flexibility thing. And as long as you do that in concert with an eating strategy that has you, I do believe that a time restricted window for eating is optimal. So I usually eat 1:30 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon. That's my first meal, and then I'll eat dinner. And last night, it was like the blue plate special for a bunch of old people. We met at 6 o'clock at this restaurant, but that's great. It was, and I am old, so that I can talk about that. But but basically, the longer you go in a day without eating, the more good stuff happens in your body.
I like that, and I would agree with that. I had my first meal at noon today. Sometimes I have it at like 11, a.m., but like noon today, and then I try to kind of wrap things up by like 8 or 9 p.m. Yep. Doesn't always happen, but I give myself between like minimum 12 hours, but between 12 and 16 hours every day where I'm not eating.
I think in our community over the past decade, one sort of common theme is that people are just realizing that breakfast is like A, a waste of time, B, not necessary, C, again, too much food.
I just think if you wake up starving, there's something.
You're not metabolically flexible. That's clear. If you wake up starving, then have breakfast. But if you start to eat the right kind of foods for breakfast, or avoid even more so the wrong kinds of food for breakfast. I mean, you look at the typical American breakfast. It's cornflakes, it's or oatmeal and orange juice and toast with jam. It's like a sugar fest.
What's a Mark Sisson breakfast?
Well,
like the meal that you break your fast with.
Oh, well, I will break a fast with, an omelet at 1 o'clock or 1:30 or 2. Today, I ate at 2 o'clock today, and I had a burger without a bun. And literally, a burger without a bun, that was it, full stop. It's all I need. So one of the things that you also start to realize is not only are 3 meals too much, but sometimes 2 regular meals of what you used to eat are also too much food. So I tend to make my dinner my main meal, partly because it's a social thing. There's a point at which I want to sit down with people and eat and discuss and enjoy and have a glass of wine, and so that's kind of my ceremonial, nice meal. And it's no bigger than it would have been. It's no bigger because it's the only meal, if that's the case. It's still a piece of steak, some grilled vegetables, maybe some cheese, and a glass of wine. But I've recognized over the past 5 years that I've cut my total calories back 30%, 35% from what they were 5 or 6 years ago. And same body fat, same strength levels, same energy levels. So it's a real eye-opener. I did a thought experiment a bunch of years ago where, we tend as humans to see what we can get away with, right? So, your employees at work tend to see how little work they can do and still get paid. Not you guys listening, but and with food, we tend to see how much food we can eat and not get fat or gain weight or feel guilty or feel like or whatever, get sick. But it really pushes up to the edge for a lot of people. It's like that's kind of the finish your plate thing. God bless Cheesecake Factory for their giant portions.
Oh, man.
But what it does is it tends to have people be okay with overeating because they just tend to. It's like they see what they can get away with. So a bunch of years ago, I thought, would be really interesting is to see not what's the most amount I can eat, and not gain weight, but what's the least amount I can eat and maintain muscle mass, still have all the energy I need, never get sick, and most importantly, not be hungry, because that hunger just ruins everything. Yeah. And if you can consciously kind of go back and say, what's the least amount of this meal I can eat and not be hungry later on, you find that it's a demonstrably smaller amount of food than what you used to think you could get away with and not gain weight.
Wow, so interesting. Yeah, I tend to wake up and I, like when I have my first meal around 11 or noon, it always tends to be like, very protein rich. I'm not big on like I don't like use a lot of added fats or oils. Like I'll use like extra virgin olive oil, which I'm a huge fan of, a tablespoon, 2 tablespoons max. And then generally I'll snack throughout the day. Well, I don't snack throughout the day, but if I do choose to snack, it'll be, I'll tend to reach for protein, protein rich foods.
Yep.
And then I have like my big dinner meal,
Yep.
One thing I've wondered about you, so on the spectrum of like fully plant-based, fully carnivore, like where does Mark Sisson sit on that continuum?
So I used to be in the middle, and now I'm more toward carnivore. So I've really been intrigued by the work of Paul Saladino, Sean Baker, a number of these people who are MDs and researchers in this field. And every time I try to poke a hole in their argument, I get a pretty decent response about, we don't, not only do we not need to eat nearly as much in the way of vegetable matter and fruit, but for some people, that amount of vegetables is, again, antithetical to health, whether it's nightshades, whether it's oxalates, whether it's, what we would assume to be beneficial antioxidants are actually, in fact, plant defenses against us, and they're manifesting themselves in some gut irritation with certain people. And the reason I still continue to eat plants is I want to have the widest variety of food in my diet. I just like broccoli with butter on it. I like Brussels sprouts. I like green peas. I mean, and so I'm not going to not eat them anymore. My fear, not just for me, but for people that are following me, is that their diet will become too boring. And again, I want life to be exciting. I want every bite of food that I eat to taste great. Last night at dinner, I had a burrata salad. I had that piece of burrata, and it came with peaches, and that was like a novel concept for me. So I had a couple of peaches. I mean, that's not. Yes, peaches are full of sugar, but I mean, in the context of that and that New York steak that I had, and you had that 2-pound ribeye.
Oh, it was so good.
Yeah,
so good.
Yeah.
What was the name of that restaurant again?
Draycott.
Draycott. Shout out to Draycott in Pacific Palisades. Really good ribeye. That's interesting. Yeah, I tend to I like plants, but I also definitely prioritize like the protein, the meat, the fish, the eggs, things like that.
One thing that I see in the keto community is a tendency to add extra fats. You were talking a little bit earlier about olive oil and the tablespoon here or there, and I see this a lot in early keto adopters, particularly people who are tremendously overweight and then went to keto because they were sort of given permission to have bacon and butter and fat and lard and cheese. And one of the dangers, not a danger, but one of the reasons that they maybe plateau at some point is they're still thinking about this being a fat-centric diet, the keto diet being fat-centric, and it's not so much that as it's a carb-deficient diet. It's not that you have to add back a ton of fat. It's that you have to really cut the carbs, and another sort of I think erroneous assumption was that too much protein will convert to glucose and kick you out of ketosis. Well, it takes a fair amount of protein to do that, and if people are having 150 or 160 grams of protein a day, that's not too much, especially if you're a large person who's got a lot of fat to burn. So the notion that you would then want to add in more fat so that the ratios came back into range, what it does is you become good at burning fat. You're just not burning off your own body fat.
You're not burning off your own fat.
Yeah.
I think that's a crucial distinction that you made, that the ketone fire hose is not a function of added fat in your diet or any fat in your diet. It's purely a function of the deficit of exogenous glucose, i.e.,
Mostly in form of carbs, yeah.
Yes.
But you're right, exogenous glucose, because it's, glucose is what raises insulin, and insulin shuts off ketosis. So you can accomplish this. You could be a vegetarian and get into ketosis. And you can get into ketosis with, caloric restriction versus just macronutrient manipulation.
Yeah.
But the easiest way is to have a low carb diet that's adequate in protein and then is not too over the top in terms of fat.
Yeah, I think some of the carnivore people, if I may share a theory, I think some of these guys were probably. You ever meet somebody who kind of has like, I'll just use men as an example. Like you ever meet a guy who has like kind of a 12-year-old boy diet? Like they enjoy pizza, they eat waffles. Like a lot of my like my brothers will tell me, so like their coworkers, they see kind of like the kinds of foods that their coworkers eat. They'll eat like hot dogs and pizza and like things like that. Like that, they're just, your palate doesn't evolve. Your theory about, or your philosophy about how to eat doesn't evolve. And so vegetables don't really play a role in that. And so then you find a diet like the carnivore diet that like allows you to eat all the meat that you want and see good results from it. Like there's no doubt that. And so I think the reason why it's so easy for some of these people to cut vegetables out of their diet is because they never liked vegetables to begin with. And I think that has to do with the fact that many people just don't know how to cook vegetables and make them delicious. So for me, like when I think about cutting out like the kinds of vegetables that I know how to make and season properly, to me that just seems like the most boring life, because I've had delicious vegetables. But some of these people in the carnivore community, they're like, well, they don't like vegetables, or they don't like fruit or anything like that. And I'm like, what a
No, that's a good theory. I like that, the 12-year-old boy diet theory.
Do you ever meet anybody like that?
Well, I'm sure a lot of people. No, it's the the frat boy diet or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I know a lot of adult females that like still love mac and cheese and things like that. Pizza, mac and cheese, like all these kinds of foods. Like, there's nothing bad about those foods,
right,
but they just like when you build your diet around them, they're
limiting in terms. You're right, in terms of the palate.
Yeah.
No, that's interesting, because if you kind of parse the diet in general of a healthy person, if you've gotten rid of sugars, so that's pies, cakes, candies, cookies. If you've gotten rid of grains, it's crackers and breads and cereals. If you've gotten rid of industrial seed oils, so you've gotten rid of soy, corn, canola, cottonseed, whatever else that they might be using, you come down to a pretty short list of food, man. Yeah. You've got beef, pork, lamb, you've got chicken and turkey, and then you've got some fish, and that's your protein sources. That's really limiting. At least if you're eating vegetables, you got 17 vegetables that you're going to eat. I know you can name 10, but when you get past 10, it's you start to have to pull in the rutabagas and the so it's an interesting challenge to be an excited eater when you're limited in your the types of foods that you can eat are just meat.
Yeah.
Right. Or maybe you're throwing some chicken in there. Although most carnivores consider chicken a very inferior choice.
Yeah, they prefer the ruminants.
Yeah. And again, we're back to why are we here? Are we here to see how long we can go just eating meat, or are we here to optimize our lifespan and or enjoy the most amount of every moment we can? And in my book, that includes pleasurable activities like eating, and that of necessity requires some variety, and the methods of preparation, the herbs, the spices, the sauces, the dressings, the toppings. I mean, that's why I started Primal Kitchen. I started Primal Kitchen because when I recognized that I got rid of all this other stuff and there were only going to be 5 kinds of meat and 17 vegetables, like how am I going to make those palatable? Well, for me, the first thing was I got 15 salad dressings. So I can show you a bowl of vegetables, raw vegetables, that I will call a salad. And I got 15 different ways to make it flavorful. So that's the notion of variety there. Right?
Yeah.
And we've got, red barbecue sauce and the gold barbecue sauce. And we got pasta sauces now, so you can have zucchini pasta.
So good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I live and breathe like your ketchup, your avocado mayo, the ranch is a staple. What else the lemon turmeric
Yeah.
Dressing is a really good one.
And those are all things that you can put on
Yeah.
otherwise healthy but sort of boring food and make them more exciting.
I just think a lot of people don't know how to they don't know how to cook vegetables. They don't know the the low and slow method, really kind of breaks
Well, that's a 42-second video
yeah.
on how to cook vegetables.
Yeah, I mean, but it should be done. It should be done. People are also very they don't like to use salt because they think that salt's not good for you, so they don't make them as savory as they should be. Yeah.
Oh, got to have salt in vegetables.
Gotta have salt.
Yeah.
Gotta have salt. I mean, you gotta have salt on an avocado.
Yeah.
You try eating avocados are amazing. Try eating an avocado without salt.
Yeah.
Yeah, no bueno. Hey, if you like that video, you need to check out this one here, and I'll see you there.
We're not bored anymore. So as we evolved, boredom was this thing, this discomfort that basically told us, hey, whatever you're doing right now, your return on your time invested is running low. So you got to go do something else. So pretend that you and I are out hunting. We haven't seen any animals and the sun is about to set and we don't have food for our family. We would get bored and boredom would tell us, hey, maybe you should go, dig up some tubers or something.